Hey guys, so real quick, this video is quite long. I actually didn't expect it to be this long when I was recording it, but there are going to be timestamps in the description for the different sections covered in the video. However, if you are starting the personal statement and you haven't started it just yet, then I'd recommend that you watch the video to its entirety, as I believe that all the advice here is quite useful and it's what I did personally. That got me obviously 5 out of 5 uni offers from places like LSE, Warwick, King's, St Andrews, and Exeter. So yeah, that was all I really wanted to say before we get into the video, and let's get right into it.
Starting the personal statement is one of the most daunting tasks. You're plagued with thoughts like, how do I start, what should I include, and how do I make it stand out? Well, about a year ago, I was in the exact same boat until I adopted these strategies that took my personal statement from average to strong enough to secure 5 out of 5 uni offers. In this video, I'll share the principles and walk you through some good and bad examples so you know exactly how to approach your own. Let's get right into it. Now, real quick, as I'm sure or I hope you already know, the personal statement has been restructured into 3 questions. Why do you want to study the course or subject? How have your qualifications or studies helped you prepare? And what else have you done to prepare outside of education? And why are these experiences useful? With a minimum of 350 characters for each question and a maximum of 4,000 characters total, including spaces. Also, I'll be tailoring a lot of the advice here towards applying to the LSE, but since the LSE is notoriously picky when it comes to personal statements, they're pretty much known for that, pretty much all of the advice here is usually more than enough for any university and degree. When answering question 1, I believe you should break down the question into 2 stages. Stage 1, the initial stepping stone, and stage 2, the academic motivator. I'll explain what these are in a moment. Stage 1, the stepping stone. For stage 1, what you need to find is what I like to call a stepping stone, something that sets off a chain of events you can write about to demonstrate where your passion for the course began. Whether you're studying economics, chemistry, politics, your passion for the course likely started somewhere, and it's important that you mention or you start the beginning of question 1 by at least mentioning where that initial spark came from. The goal here is to be able to express your journey in a clear, step-by-step way, showing how your interest grew rather than just stating that you're passionate. Everyone that's applying for the course is passionate, but what makes you stand out? What makes your journey unique and what makes you desirable to admissions officers? Now, everyone's path is going to look different, but let me give you a quick example of how this journey might have looked for some of you. Here is a great example that clearly shows a student's journey for economics. I am an inquisitive student, first drawn to economics through an introduction to game theory in my A-level studies. First sentence, we're very to the point. I am an inquisitive student. We're using the first person. Using the first person is very important since it makes it in the active voice. Also, we clearly see where the student's initial spark came from. In this case, their introduction to game theory in A-level studies. I have consequently recognized how strategic interactions and market outcomes shape competition and stability. Again, we are now elaborating more upon what was very interesting within game theory. Eager to understand how these abstract models hold up against real-world complexities. So, real quick, we are now progressing. We are showing how the student is eager to understand and kind of build upon their academic subject and their academic understanding of the subject. I turn to analyzing the 2008 financial crisis. Okay, so we're being active again. We are now analyzing a real-world case that occurred that obviously had a lot of economic ramifications. Rajan's analysis of the collapse motivated me to pursue banking work experience to see how theory and policy interact in practice. Now, here we're mentioning an expert. So we're mentioning how an expert's analysis of the collapse, which we found when we were analyzing the 2008 financial crisis, we see that we've analyzed it, and we're kind of elaborating upon the analysis by discussing this expert here, Rajan, and their analysis of the collapse and what that led you to do further. So we're clearly seeing a step-by-step progression where the initial interest of game theory led to them eventually pursuing something more active, which in this case is banking work experience. Now, this leads me on to stage 2 of the first question, also known as the academic motivator. Stage 2 is about demonstrating how you engaged with the subject in a more academic way and developed your own opinions on key issues. The important thing here, in my opinion, is to kind of show your own back and forth experience that represents how you engaged with your subject to a super curricular level. For example, you might have explored one theory, then encounter a contradiction or limitation that pushes you to consider another, and so on. I like to personally think of it as an A to B to C to D progression or structure, where each idea naturally leads on to the next, with every limitation you find driving your thinking in a new direction. Now, obviously, it's very important that you're genuine with this method of thinking. Don't just embellish what you've written. Make sure that the progression that you demonstrate is accurate to the progression you underwent. Now, this section has to end with you demonstrating why you are interested in studying the subject based on this academic exploration you've done. Here, we directly answer the initial question. Now, here is a good example that follows on from the economics example we saw earlier. During my internship at HSBC, I was struck by how monetary policy tools could stabilize short-term shocks. Yet, when I examined data on quantitative easing, I noted its failure to generate productivity-led growth. Okay, so we're finding a limitation. We're seeing how we've analyzed data in the internship, but we've somehow found a limitation or some sort of problem. Now, guys, if you are doing internships at this time, it's kind of late, but it's important that you're very active in this way, that you're examining data, that you're questioning the limitations, and that you are actually being active in your internship. Now, this realization pushed me towards fiscal stimulus, where Keynesian multipliers initially seemed promising. Okay, now don't get too hung up on the economics aspect of it. What I'm trying to get across to you is you can kind of clearly see that they were interested in something, then they realized a problem, and then they went to something else now. However, IMF studies on the Eurozone debt crisis forced me to reconsider its long-term viability. Again, they thought Keynesian multipliers would be the solution, but now they've realized that IMF studies forced them to kind of reconsider how good Keynesian multipliers are in the long term. Now we think that maybe structural reforms will be a good solution, as productivity growth offered a more sustainable solution. However, Acemoglu, a notable figure within the economics field, and their work on institutional constraints emphasized governance failures. So again, we thought we found a solution, but now we found out that there's a massive limitation associated with it. And you can kind of clearly see, we think we found a solution, but no, there's a problem. Okay, there's another solution now, there's another problem. So that kind of back and forth is very important. And it's very important that if you are still kind of doing your work for your personal statement, as in if you're like, doing internships, or if you're focused on kind of like exploring different aspects of the field that you want to study, that you do this back and forth with yourself, that you really push your passion in that way. You try to find solutions, but then you might find an issue to it, or you might find a better solution later on. So we found all these contradictions, these conflictions, these conflicting ideas, and wrestling with these conflictions here made me value the interaction between short-term demand management and long-term systemic reform. So we've kind of come to this evaluation, this judgment of, okay, we are valuing this kind of conflict. I am driven to study economics at degree level to analyze this interplay across contexts and to formulate policies that balance immediate stabilization with sustainable long-term growth. Pretty much, I am driven to further find a solution to this, to analyze this conflict, these conflicts, this interplay across different situations and different contexts. So we can very clearly see that our interest is very multifaceted. Our interest is not just that, we're interested in this one thing, but instead we've explored a back and forth to such a degree of depth in the subject that has kind of fueled our passion, our interest to pursue this further at degree level and find a solution. What I want you to take from this example is the way the academic journey is expressed, the way we have this back and forth and this really deep level of interest showing. Now, of course, your journey may not look exactly like this. I don't want this video to come across as me giving you a one-size-fits-all template, since the most important aspect of the personal statement is that you are genuine about your personal journey. This is also the kind of depth you'll be expected to explore different concepts in at university. So it's important that you show you can already do it in year 13. If you guys want as well, real quick, you can end this off by shortly discussing a very brief 5-year plan. Now, a 5-year plan kind of just discusses what you're going to do with the degree after you obtain it. For example, you might want to go into a master's, or you might want to go into consulting or investment banking or whatever it is. This is what I did in my personal statement before the whole structure got changed into 3 questions. If you guys feel like you can incorporate and implement it well at the end of your answer to the first question, then by all means go for it. But otherwise, if it's hard to implement and the cohesion of the paragraph is broken, I'd recommend just sticking to answering the questions quite directly. Now, as promised, here is what I believe is a bad example that also attempts to answer question 1. I want to study economics because I am fascinated by how it explains the world around us. That, as a statement, is very brief. Economics is a very multifaceted and very interdisciplinary subject. We can go into behavioral economics, we can go into understanding of financial systems and the finance aspect of it. We can go into the game theory, mathematical aspect of it. We can go to global economics, microeconomics, macroeconomics. There's a lot of different things we can go into, maybe the economics of business. The point is that this is very broad. There are many different aspects of economics that explain the world around us, and you're not specifying which one you specifically are interested in. Now on to question 2. How have your qualifications or studies helped you prepare? Now, in my opinion, this question gives you the most freedom with regards to how you answer it. But my number one piece of advice with this section is to focus on depth and not breadth. Students often have this misconception that you should just mention as many relevant supercurricular experiences as possible. But many universities, such as the LSE, state on their website that they care about how you reflected upon your experiences rather than just mentioning as much as possible. Now, remember how we approached stage 2 in question 1? We're pretty much going to do the same thing here, but this time we should branch off of a different supercurricular experience. In the case of the economics one, we branched off of a HSBC internship. This time we might want to branch off of a course we were doing. For example, if you are applying for chemistry at Imperial and you've already discussed how Dr. Sunita Satyapal's advocacy for hydrogen and clean energy led you to explore alternative fuel cells, here you can maybe discuss a more theoretical aspect of the subject, such as the academic tension between quantum chemistry and traditional bonding theories. Here's another example for chemistry that is styled slightly differently, but also shows an example of a student's exploration of the subject to a desirable extent. I was inspired by my A-level chemistry studies to examine valence bond theory when publishing my first article in the Royal Society of Chemistry School's analyst competition. Here we see how a student's study of valence bond theory in A-level chemistry initiated this academic journey. And they've also been able to really nicely implement a supercurricular activity that they have accomplished. So in this case, they came first place in an article in the Royal Society of Chemistry School analyst competition. However, to resolve why it failed to explain resonance and transition metal color, I turned to Housecroft's Inorganic Chemistry, which introduced molecular orbital theory's delocalized account. Okay, so again, very similar structure. I hope you guys are seeing this. We have a limitation, in this case, a failure to explain resonance and transition metal color. So we went to a different source, Housecroft's Inorganic Chemistry. Yet its abstraction left me questioning whether such models conveyed chemical intuition. So I studied Szabo and Austen's modern quantum chemistry. Again, we find a problem, but then we try to find a solution. So we were now studying some other experts' work in the field. Concluding that traditional models remain more useful for providing explanatory traction, I recognized how navigating these tensions sharpened the way I approach problems, balancing theory with practicality, which is vital preparation for studying chemistry at degree level. So we're concluding with our own opinion on the subject and how it led us to kind of gain a skill of approaching problems in a new way, balancing theory with practicality, a very important thing that students need to have when studying chemistry at degree level. So we're again directly linking it back to the question in that way. Here's again another very bad example. My A-level subjects have helped me prepare a lot for a chemistry degree because in chemistry I learned about bonding, reactions, and practicals, which showed me how science works in the lab. Again, we're seeing the similar issues kind of popping up. Learn about bonding, reactions, practicals. We're not being specific here. In maths, I developed problem-solving skills that will be important at university. We're just jumping around from chemistry to maths. It doesn't seem very clear what we're actually applying for. Biology also helped me as I covered topics like proteins and cells, which links to biochemistry. Again, we're being way too broad here. Topics like proteins and cells could have whole paragraphs in of themselves, but instead we're not discussing them further. Now to wrap things up, let's move on to question 3. What else have you done to prepare outside of education, and why are these experiences useful? Now, many universities, such as the LSE, state on their website that not as much academic information has to be given in this section as compared to others, and that they're perfectly fine with the minimum character count of 350 characters being satisfied here. However, with that being said, it's still important that you don't make the same mistake of listing many different experiences, but instead focus on 1 or 2 at most. Here, I would recommend that you choose any practical experience that you haven't already mentioned and what you learn from it from a skills perspective. For example, you may have engaged in voluntary work in a developing country, which allowed you to develop useful interpersonal skills or leadership skills that you hope to apply in the future. I think this can be best demonstrated with an example, so let's have a look for management. When running my clothes business, I struggled to persuade others to follow my lead, which made me aware of my limits as a communicator. So now we're kind of transitioning away from an academic aspect. It's good that we were very academic in the beginning, but with this section, I believe it's more important that you discuss where your limits were with your skills and how you were able to improve them. In this case, when running a clothing business, again, we're very subtly implementing. You see, we're not just kind of stating, oh, I ran a clothing business. We're kind of like shimmying it in there, like, oh, I ran a clothing business, but when I was running it, I realized a limitation of mine. This inspired me to volunteer in a youth sports initiative where I practiced listening to teammates, resolving small conflicts, and guiding groups to stay motivated, which sharpened my interpersonal skills. Here, we're being very clear in what we did in this youth sports initiative. We listened to teammates, we resolved conflicts, we guided groups. These are all very active things we did, and we kind of conclude by saying that they sharpened our skills that were already kind of weak initially. A lot of students would just kind of stop there, but we link it back to the clothing business in this case. Applying these lessons back into my venture, I learned to frame ideas more clearly, motivate collaboration, and negotiate with suppliers more effectively. So it's very simple, but we're showing how we were bad at one thing, we didn't experience, we learned from it, and we improved in our original situation. As a result, I was able to improve customer engagement and raise monthly sales by 22%. These experiences made me realize how crucial effective leadership is to organizational success, giving me a deeper appreciation for how organizational behavior can be understood at degree level. We're tying it in now to the degree. So we're linking it to leadership and organizational success. So to close things off, the main key takeaway I want you to get from this is that you should really demonstrate a clear and concise structure where you show your academic interest in a very concise and methodical way that demonstrates how you progressed from one point to another. Make sure you're keeping it very relevant and very genuine to your own experience. If you haven't started writing your personal statement just yet, make sure that when you're focusing on your experiences, you're being very careful with how you're actually doing them, that you're exploring further into the subject and why you're interested in it. Also, don't make the mistake of listing many experiences without discussing what you've learned from them. And make sure that you are genuine in describing your actual journey. Don't follow the exact wording that I've kind of done here, but instead try to focus on how I've structured each example. Here are a few useful links. They'll be in the description of this video as well. And last but not least, guys, don't stress too much about it. I hope that I've made things a little bit easier for you now in terms of like demonstrating what you kind of should be doing if you're applying to these very high-end unis. They are very cutthroat with the personal statement process, especially universities such as the LSE. So make sure that you are very academic, you're very relevant to yourself, you're very concise, and you show your journey in a very genuine and organic manner. With all of that, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you've watched all the way to the end, I hope you find this useful. Sorry for the wait on this one. I've been really busy with my own uni prep, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. So peace.